Thank you, Margaret. We appreciate the invitation and the fact that we connected. And thank Sharon Garber, who co-chairs our DOT Anti-Racism Committee with Dudley Deshomes Cole. We really appreciate having this opportunity to be with you. I'm driving in the car, my wife's driving, while we go cross country to reunite with our kids after 14 months of not seeing them. These have been tumultuous months, right? Not only with COVID, but also as the world watched the events in the Twin Cities with the murder of George Floyd. And that led our congregation to do some soul searching about what we could be doing better, what we could be doing more of to work on anti-racism. And so with Sharon and Dudley's help, we formed this committee with my colleague, Rabbi Aaron Weininger. We have been doing some serious self-reflection. There were some things that I think we needed to grapple with especially. The first was the work we had to do internally with our members who were Jews of color, our visitors to our synagogue, to make sure that they were really feeling welcome. And so that's been an important focus. We also, I think, have had to do education. I don't know what people's ideas are about Minnesota. If you think about people like Hubert Humphrey and Walter Mondale of blessed memory, you may have one impression, but Minnesota was considered, Minneapolis was considered before World War II the most anti-Semitic city in the country. So some 45,000 Jews have dealt with that. We also have been having to deal with what could be called Jim Crow of the North, as we have been studying and learning about housing covenants that kept Black people particularly out of certain neighborhoods. And kind of the open secret that racism has been persistent and serious problem in Minnesota. So that's the work that we're at and trying to address both internally as a congregation and vis-a-vis our community. So we so welcome this opportunity to be with you at Beth Birmingham and to share part of your history, your experience as we work on this common project. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I'll remove your pin here so that you can go back to your drive, but it's just really interesting to hear a little bit about where you all are as a community. And I'm really excited to be having this conversation, sort of across regional context today. I think that's going to be really exciting. So I am now going to tell you just a little bit about Lisa before I turn it over to her for the exciting part of our program. So it's my pleasure to introduce Lisa McNair. Lisa McNair is the younger sister of Denise McNair. He was one of the 4 girls killed in the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing in 1963. Of course, a really pivotal part of Birmingham's history. Lisa is a professional public speaker on reconciliation and civil rights and has spoken to groups across the country about her family's story and the lessons she's learned from it. She's also currently working on cataloging her father, Chris McNair's wonderful, iconic civil rights photographs, and owns her own photography company, Posh Photographs. She was just telling me a second ago about photographing the Miles College graduation last night. She's a graduate of University of Alabama, both Tuscaloosa and Birmingham campuses, and an extremely active member of the Birmingham community. I feel like I run into Lisa on various Zoom things all the time. One of the roles that she's serving right now that I thought was exciting and might mention was serving on the board of the Morgan Project, a group working to eradicate systemic racism. They're really interesting and worth checking out. I've really enjoyed getting to know Lisa over the last couple of years, and I'm so grateful that she's here joining us today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Lisa, and let you take it over.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon. So good to be able to talk to you, those who are local and those in Minnesota. About 4 years ago, I was flown to Minnesota to speak to several colleges there. One was North Hennepin College, and this year they had me back via Zoom, and I spoke to one of the libraries there. So I'm getting to know a lot about Minnesota, a place I would not have thought I'd get to know very much about. But I enjoyed my visit there, and I know I'll enjoy talking with you all today. I'm going to just share a PowerPoint with you. I have this PowerPoint. I started using a PowerPoint um, as an idea from my friend Jeff Steinberg, who was really the first Jewish person that I really became close with. He is a teacher that teaches as a nonprofit in San Francisco, California, that takes students from through the South to learn on a 7-day traveling educational journey about the civil rights movement and nonviolence. And he said, you need a PowerPoint. You know, you're okay, but you'd be better if you had some images to show. So, and thanks to Jeff Steinberg, I had the images done. So I'm gonna share my screen and then I'm gonna speak a few words and then we'll open the floor for questions. Everybody see it?
Yep, we can see it.
Great. Okay, I'm trying to see it. Okay, there we go. The screen went really big for a second. Okay. All right. As you may know, my sister Denise was one of the 4 little girls killed in the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church on September 15th of 1963. The other girls killed on that day were Addie Mae Collins, Carol Robertson, and Cynthia Morris Wesley. They were 14 and starting their freshman year in high school. Denise was only 11 years old and the only child of my parents. So you can imagine that usually people have a kid and every 4 years they have another kid, you know. Well, my parents had tried to have kids the whole time, but my mother had never been able to go carry to term. So you can imagine that was awfully tragic when Denise was killed in period, but thinking that she might not have any other children, I'm sure was devastating. But she prayed and she had faith, and almost exactly a year from the day Denise was murdered, I was born. Then 4 years after that, my younger sister, Kimberly, was born. And she is a local chef here and holistic health coach with Biddy's Living Kitchen. These are some pictures from the day of the bombing. The one on the left is a picture of the crater that the bomb left inside the church. It blew the wall out and you see it damaged the building across the street. It was quite a horrific bomb. Daddy was many, many blocks away and he heard it. So it was quite a horrendous bomb. Then on the picture on the right, you see most people see this as history, but I see this as family. The lady on the left is my grandmother. The little girl in front of her is my cousin Lynn, who was best friends with Denise. They were 2 first cousins from 2 sisters, and they went everywhere together. And then this is my aunt Juanita, who has her hand consoling my mother. On this day, Lynn and Denise went everywhere together, but my auntie had a newborn and he wasn't well, so she didn't go to church. If she had gone to church, we more than likely would have had 2 deaths in the family because Lynn and Denise were inseparable. This picture I just added in. I've got to take a better picture of it, but when they sent her to the morgue, the funeral home later, after they sent home her effects, they included this brick, and this brick was embedded in her head. And we have donated it to the Civil Rights Institute. This is Sarah Collins Rudolph. She's the 5th girl, and she was in the bathroom along with the other girls that day. People don't know much about her, but she was lost an eye. She was blind, but she was standing, coming around close to them, not just far enough that she did not lose her life that morning. And she now has her own book out telling about her story and her life. The funerals were, the girls, 3 of the girls were funeralized together. The day after the bombing, Dr. King and several other ministers came over from Atlanta to meet with the families, and they wanted to have a mass funeral. However, Mrs. Robinson had already planned her daughter's funeral, and she didn't want to change it. And they felt like that was perfectly fine, and they honored her wishes. But the other family members had a mass funeral. So Denise, Addie Mae, and Cynthia Wesley were funeralized together. This is a picture of my mom and dad. They're coming down after the funeral, going to the cars. And on the right is a picture of my mother that was taken when she passed out at the cemetery because it was just more than she could bear. This is a picture of mom and dad. This one on the left was the one taken the day after the bombing. The one on the right was at Daddy's 90th birthday. So that was several years ago. My daddy has passed on now. It will be, oh my God, 2 years on the 8th of this month. My mom is still here. She's 92. She has Alzheimer's and is legally blind, but she's doing okay. She's happy and pleasant, and she's not like your typical Alzheimer's patient. She's not angry or combative. She's never going to run anywhere because she can barely get around. She walks with a walker. But she's very pleasant and silly, and her favorite thing in the world is to eat. She loves to eat. She loves to eat all day long. She wants gum, a barbecue chicken sandwich, and walnut ice cream. And every now and then she asks for chitlins. I'm not doing that. I just can't. But we give her everything else that she wants. And so she's doing okay. I like to think I had the best parents in the whole world, which I'm sure a lot of you do too. And they taught us to love everybody, and no matter who they were, black or white. You can imagine they could have been people who taught us to hate all white people after what happened to my sister. But they were Christians, and they felt like, all white people weren't bad. They knew that, and they knew that we should take each person as an individual and love them like Christ loves us. But I also like to think another reason they knew that personally, because my dad didn't belong to 16th Street. He didn't attend that church with Mom and Denise. He went to a small Lutheran church called St. Paul Lutheran Church. And it's a small church, maybe 200 or 300 members, and were all black except for 5 people. And those 5 people were the pastor, his wife, and their 3 kids. They were white. And that gave us a wonderful opportunity to learn that all white people didn't hate black people, and that in fact, many of them were allies and friends. We are still friends with the Wellwangers. They are still alive, and they live in Minnesota, not Minnesota, and Milwaukee. I'm thinking cold and north. Live in Milwaukee, and they are still very active in the cause. In fact, Joyce was arrested during one of the protests last year for protesting, so she is still in the game, and I just love them to death. My dad believed that the way to support Denise and her death would be to go into public service. So in 1973, he was elected as one of the first African Americans to the state legislature in our county in Birmingham. And this is a picture of us at the swearing in. And I love the glasses that Mama had on. So that's pretty much the only reason I include that picture. I love that. The people always ask about the killers. There were originally 4 people identified as having possibly bombed the church, but no one was immediately brought to justice or arrested or anything. And in 1968, the case was closed. So the first person was not brought to justice until 1977, when this gentleman, Bill Baxley, who was the attorney general for the state of Alabama and had become friends with Dad in the legislature, decided to bring him to justice. And they just brought this one person, and he was convicted of murdering Denise and served a life sentence in prison. In 1997, Spike Lee did the documentary, 4 Little Girls. I don't know how many of you have seen this documentary, But it's an excellent documentary on the four girls, their lives, and what Birmingham was like during that time. It is now streaming on Netflix, Amazon Prime, and HBO Max, and maybe a few other things for free. So if you have not watched it, I highly recommend that you do take a look at it because it's very well done. It was up for an Academy Award. That later on in 2001 and 2002, the other two killers who were still alive were not brought into justice until then. And that was done by our then U.S. Attorney, Doug Jones, who was just recently our U.S. Senator. And Doug Jones brought those last two guys to justice and got convictions, and they served life sentences until their death. And one of them, Thomas Blanton, just died in prison this past summer. In 2013, the four girls were posthumously given the Congressional Gold Medal. Congressional Gold Medal is the highest honor a citizen can get from Congress. And what I thought was cool was our only Black congressperson, who's Terry Sewell, who is Democrat and African American, and one of our Republican senators, Spencer Backus, who was white and Republican, came together and wrote the bill for the girls to receive this wonderful honor. And it was voted unanimously in the House and Senate. And you know, that hadn't happened a lot. So it was a great and wonderful experience. And you know, from school, once a bill is passed, it goes to the president to be signed. And that gave us the wonderful, me and Mama, the opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. and meet President Obama in the Oval Office and see him sign the bill for the girls to get the gold medal. So Mama and I remember that, and we just loved that. And it was a wonderful experience, a wonderful honor for the girls as well. The bombing was something that was done here in Birmingham, but it affected the whole city, the whole state, the whole country. People all over often talk about knowing about the bombing. I meet people, foreigners from other countries all the time, who say that they had heard about the terrible tragedy. But what people don't know, very many don't know, is that the country of Wales and the citizens of Wales were so moved that they gathered their pennies and dollars, and the individual citizens, not the monarchy, not the government, and they paid for this huge stained glass window to be designed, made, and shipped and installed at the church a year after the bombing. And on the right, you'll see a picture of me and Mom and the minister at the time at the installation of the installation of the Wales window, what we call the Wales window. And what we thought of was really neat at the time is there were very little stained glass windows of any kind with Black images. And this is an image of a Black Jesus. Denise was well loved in the neighborhood, and she loved helping other people. She was a real leader, and I was going over her funeral program the other day, and I found these words, and I thought they would be a good caption for this picture. Denise showed great leadership ability and love to be associated with children. She was also fond of helping others. And this is a picture of her giving a muscular dystrophy fair in our front yard with her friends. So this is Denise on the right, our neighbor Barbara Nunn, who still lives across the street from us. I talked to her this morning, and our cousin Lynn. And I just thought that was really cool that she could be that type of person. I wish I had known her and gotten to spend time with her. This is a picture of the four little girls statue at the 50th anniversary, which was 2013. At the beginning of that year, citizens of Birmingham decided that, hey, we don't have a living monument to the girls. We don't have anything. What can we do? So they came together and raised money and built these statues. I shot this picture, and it's shot from behind the statues, but I like the fact that the church was the silhouette in the background. And so that is across the street at the Kelly Ingram Park here in Birmingham, and it's really cool. And And so our topic today is, where do we go from here? I think I have a lot to say about that, so I will try to keep it down as to a minimal. But my outlook on everything basically is that we are all more alike than we are different. And we have to figure out how to reach people who don't agree with us and show them how we are more alike than different, and how racial hate and hateful words are really damaging to all of us, not just those who are saying them at people, but they're damaging to the people who say them as well. One of my sayings, one of my beliefs is to do unto others as you would have them do unto you, the golden rule. And I think people say that, but they don't really think about it. But it's do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I think that's a great conversations piece. If we're talking to someone who doesn't really get it, would you really want the way you're treating other people to somebody to treat you in that same manner? I think it's important that people see that and they know that, and really go and think about that close up. I mean, if you were being stalked in the store, if you were being pulled over by cops all the time, every time you went somewhere, you were being killed or murdered and being scared to just go outside, would you want that life to be your life? I think that's a conversation we have to have. Also, I think we have to come out of our comfort zone to talk to people and help people to understand that. I probably grew up and have a life more like you. I've kind of had a privileged life. My mom was a teacher, and her family, it was a family of note here in Birmingham, the Black community. My father was a legislator. We went to private school. We pretty much got to do anything and everything that we wanted to do as people here in Birmingham. But even more so, we got to do things that a lot of Black people didn't get to do. And for a while there, I was like, I don't know what everybody's complaining about. This life is great. I mean, there's no racism. I mean, everything is awesome. What was awesome for me? But it wasn't awesome for my friends. Wasn't awesome for my neighbors. Wasn't awesome for my contemporaries. And like Dr. King says, if my people are not free, I am not free. And I had to learn that lesson too. So I had to learn that I need to be in the game and be able to fight for everybody else, because their freedom was my freedom. This is a picture of Denise's headstone. It says, she loved all, but a mad bomber hated her kind. In my speaking all over the country in different places, I always feel for the most part that I'm speaking to people who are woke, as that term that everybody's using, the people that get it. But what about the people who are not really woke? How are we going to reach them? How are we going to share with them? And I find, for me, I'm often wondering, how do I have anything in common with them? Because a lot of times this is one of those, like, shake them, like you were acting up and your mom will just shake you and try to get you to stop acting fool. Just want to say, what the heck, but I think we have to find that common humanity within each other so that we can have the conversation and we can share how things are not right. I belong to a predominantly white church, and although nobody's there's been mean to me or said anything out of order to me, sometimes you get a look or a stare, or like you say good morning, walk down the hall and people pass you by and they don't say good morning back. But to be in that congregation, just everybody don't love you. And I just got to thinking about it one day when I was in the choir stand looking off, like, why do white people not get it? I was like, it's been like over 50 years since Denise's killed. Like, why? What is the deal? What is the holdup? What is the hesitancy? Lord, help me to understand what they are not understanding. And I got to thinking about my grandmother. My mom's mom was a wonderful woman. She was a college educated teacher. She taught school. Her husband ran his own business. They did very well as Black people in this country in the city. She taught me so many things about life and how to save money and be a woman and be a lady. And I never forget when my dad was in the state legislature, he was in Montgomery. And for those of you who aren't from here, Montgomery's about 2 hours away. So he would spend the night there several nights a week. And my mother needed help with us. So my grandma would spend the night with us and stay overnight. And when she would do that, she would make our beds. And the next morning she would come in and she'd make our beds. When we got back, our stuffed animals were on the beds with candy by them. And she said, "Oh, your animals went to the store and they brought you candy." Oh, I just think that was the sweetest thing. And she always sent us card and money on birthday. And she was just like wonderful. But Didi, as we called her, hated white people to her soul. She couldn't stand them. And she was, she knew when to not talk about that in front of them. But when we were at home, you heard her say things that were not very nice. And when Daddy and Mama sent us to private, predominantly white school, elementary school, she wasn't feeling it. And as we went into puberty, she said, "Now, don't you bring a white boy home, because we're not having that." So I got to thinking, what are the things going on in people who tend to be more racist? What is going on in their head? Whose voice are they hearing? What recordings are playing from family and friends, And how do you connect that love that I have for my grandmother with the part where she was clearly wrong? And we need to figure out a way to have conversation with people to help them understand that how they grew up, or what mom might have said, or auntie, or your dad or your mom, that was wrong. You have to love the piece of them that was the good, but that part was not good, and we need to not carry that on. But I think once we do this work, we'll all be so much better off. I'll tell you a little story and then I'll wrap it up. My dad was a politician, as I tell you. So in the late 80s, he was elected as a county commissioner. I didn't even know what that was when he got elected, but I was like, well, okay. But it was like a better job for him, and he didn't have to travel. He was going to be in town, and that was really cool. And in his department was the plumbers for the city, for the county. And as he met the head plumber, his name was Dennis. Dennis was a white guy. He was a good old boy, and he was a lot of fun. He was funny and jovial, and he was really a lot of fun to be around. So my dad grew up in a small town in Arkansas, and he had an outhouse. Well, that outhouse must have traumatized him, because once he became a county commissioner, we remodeled the house, and we now have 6 bathrooms. There's no line and no waiting. If you got to go here, you can go all day long. There's a bathroom everywhere. And so that meant that Daddy would often hire Dennis to come after hours to fix something. Like, I need a plumber now, the sink is messed up in the kitchen. I just can't imagine. I need to go back to school and become a plumber because it's so aggravating. But so Dennis was at our house all the time, and he would laugh and talk with us, and he would fix things, and he would always tease me because I went to Alabama and my sister went to Auburn, and he was a mega Auburn fan. And he would say, "Well, I like you and I like hanging with you, but she's really smarter than you because she went to the right school." And so one day after he finished fixing whatever was wrong, we sat down and had a talk. And we always sit and chit chat, or I'd walk him to the door and chit chat. And this particular day he said, "I really love your dad." He said, "Your dad is a great man. He is a real great man. And I just really love him." I said, "Well, thank you." And then he said, "But I didn't used to like black people." He said, when I grew up, they taught us to hate black people. And I hated black people. He said, "I didn't want anything to do with them. And I had some Klan affiliations at one point." And I was like, wow. And then he said that he and his wife even left Birmingham when it got integrated and sold their home and moved 20 miles south of town just so they wouldn't have to live with black people. And that kind of hurt to hear. But he said, "But I met your dad now, and I've changed the whole way I think about, black people. And I've changed the way that what I learned wasn't right. And he's good people, and you all are good people, and we really love y'all. But he didn't just change himself and the recordings in his head. He passed that on to his whole family, his wife, his kids, his son-in-laws. His son-in-law is the guy that's going to come and fix the sink. I need to call him. And whenever my sister does anything, she had a restaurant that opened up downtown a few years ago. They were the first people to come and support it. And I didn't find this out until recently. His daughter lived in California, and she would call and talk to daddy all the time. And one day her mother was dying, and she called and talked to him, and she was crying because she was upset that she wasn't going to be able to fly home to see her before she passed away. And when he hung up from the phone, he made some calls, and he called her back, and he said, I have tickets for you and the kids. You all come home to see your mom. So Dennis making that change in his head affected all these people. And so we have to do this work, because it's going to open us up to more people who love us, and we will love them. Dennis has passed on now. We used to talk all the time and have lunch. Me and an old white man. I bet people looked at us and wondered, what are y'all doing? And I miss him so much. But we've got to do the work, because at the end of the day, we are all more alike, and we're all part of the United States of America. And we need to remember that. So thank you. And I'll open the floor for questions and answers.
And if you all have questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat rather than unmuting. While we wait for some questions to come in, I'll take facilitator's privilege and ask you the first one, Lisa.
Okay.
One thing that I'm thinking a lot about as you're speaking, and especially after hearing Rabbi Kravitz talk a little bit about the legacies of redlining, in Minneapolis, and here we deal with that legacy too, and of segregation in our city. And so I often hear from folks, when we have these presentations, well, how do I have these conversations? How do I meet other groups of people who aren't in my immediate vicinity? And I'm curious what advice you have for people who are trying to figure out where to even get started.
Well, I think people are all over the place. And they're in our social circles, they're in our churches, they're in our synagogues, they're in our workplaces, they're, in our neighborhoods. We all run up against some people who have these conversations. Right now, I have a girl used to work with me, and we're having that conversation. She kind of stubborn. She's not really getting it. But the crazy thing is, she loves me, and she and her husband will do anything for me. They're just always there. But, she kind of leans to voting the wrong way, or supporting different causes that I would think were detrimental to me. So we're having that conversation. She's someone who I love and I care a great deal about. Whenever she's having a problem or her family's in trauma, I'm the first call she makes, because she wants me to pray for her. So we're having that conversation. One of my dearest friends' name is Mindy, and Mindy about 4 years ago met this guy who really, when she first met him, she said, I keep telling him, because she didn't introduce us to our friends. She's white, by the way. And she didn't introduce us to the friends right away. It took a while. And she said, I'm going to introduce him to you soon, but I keep telling him my friends are colors of the rainbow. So I hope that's okay with you. And I didn't get it when she first said that. I just thought she was trying to slide it, tell him she had a black friend. But then when I met him and started talking to him, I got it. And I was like, oh, Lord. And but she's still with him 4 years from now, since then. And she's starting to sound a little more like him than him sound a little more like her. So, I mean, you can reach out to some people like that, but there are people in your ecosystem that you can have that conversation. They're family members, they're friends, they're neighbors, who you might hear them say ugly things or say things that are not right. And you just either laugh or just ignore it or walk away, like we all do. we got to stop ignoring it. We got to call a thing and call people on their stuff when they are when they're in it. So that would be my answer to that.
Yeah, that's such a great answer. I mean, it makes me feel like sometimes, and myself included, it's easy to sort of use that idea as an excuse, but that we all have opportunities where we could be having those conversations. We had a great question coming from Lisa. She said, "Are you still in touch with the families of the other girls, and have they remained as positive and hopeful as your family?"
Thank you. Now that is the question. There are like 3 or 4 questions I get every time I speak, and I have these wonderful T-shirts with Denise's image on it that I always would give to the audience who asked that question. So you would get a T-shirt if we were live, Lisa. Yes, we are close and we are together. We really weren't that close together till after the Spike Lee documentary. The Spike Lee documentary really brought us all closer together. And then there were premieres of the documentary all over the country. And so the families got to travel together. And I think that was a wonderful opportunity to bond. When Dad got sick and couldn't get around, and it's the 50th anniversary, a lot of people were calling me for interviews, TV and stuff. And so what I reached out on the phone and got them all on the phone and said, whenever I'm reached out to, I'm going to share with all of you. So nobody gets to interact with just me. We're together. And so I keep them posted on anything going about us that's for the girls. And have they stayed positive? I think varying degrees of positivity, but for the most part, I think everybody has stayed positive.
That's so interesting. On the note of sort of positivity, Sharon asks, what's the most hopeful thing that you are seeing right now? It's a great question.
Oh, wow. I know people ask me that a lot too, but I'm so hopeful. Y'all just don't understand. Growing up with knowing that white people hated you because killed your sister because she was Black, it's like your first memory. Oh, sorry. It's painful. And so all my life as a little girl, I was like, well, why don't they like me? I'm a pretty nice person. Mommy's nice and daddy's nice. And, so you grew up knowing that, and it's hard to carry that around, but I've seen so much change happen, and it's continuing to happen. But it's, like the marches and the protests were all just a rainbow of people. The young people just are amazing because they're just like, they're not having it. But I love to go to Walmart or the grocery store and see this older white couple with this mixed baby in their cart that they just love to death. Seeing, watching the TV and the commercials and seeing a Black man with a white woman and a white woman with a Black man. How that, I watched the commercial today about the little smelling stuff you put in the laundry, and it was a Black woman smelling the smelling stuff and a little Asian man that handed her the product in the commercial. And I thought, growing up as a kid, I didn't see any of that. So it's happening, but we got to keep the ball rolling so that we can be the rainbow that America is supposed to be.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And Lisa, thank you so much for sharing with us today. I know this is such an emotional subject, so we really appreciate you being so open with us. Got a few more really great questions that have come in. One is, if your father did not become a state legislator and develop a relationship with Bill Baxley, do you believe the case would have been reopened?
Yeah, Bill Baxley said that in the 4 Girls documentary that every morning after it happened, he remembered when it happened. And so when Joan Baez came out with that song, Birmingham Sunday, he said he played that song every morning because he said he knew he wanted to do something about that. So I think Daddy meeting him, it just kind of was like, and that's the thing I think about Birmingham. People ask me all the time, how's Birmingham? I said, Birmingham is great. And I think Birmingham is great because Daddy was in the room. Daddy was in the room with a lot of white people because he was a legislature. And so it was kind of like not deliberately in your face, but you've got to have a conversation with Chris McNair. You know that his daughter was killed in the bombing, or you live next door to somebody who knew that the guy that killed the bombing. So it made you have to think. So I think Daddy seeing Bill Baxley and the legislator made it in his mind. It was just like a, Daddy didn't say anything, but you couldn't see him in the hall and not think about it. And so, yeah, I think Bill was determined, and it would have happened without Daddy.
That's amazing. I've got another sort of interesting justice-related question. So Ella asks, in Minneapolis, she says, we've set an example with justice thus far for George Floyd. How might we continue that work as a city? And also, she says, in George Floyd's memory.
Okay, ask that question. I didn't quite get all that.
So she is pointing out that in Minneapolis, they've recently set an example with the justice system for George Floyd, and asks how, as a city, they might continue that work and in George Floyd's memory.
Oh, wow, that's great. I think continue to help people, register to vote, to be active in the process of what goes on in our community. I think so many people aren't registered to vote, or they don't know the importance of registering to vote, or they don't understand if you're registered to vote, you can be on a jury to make a decision, like what happened in the George Floyd murder. I often think of the Emmett Till trial. If you're not familiar with Emmett Till, please look him up. Emmett Till was a Black boy killed in Mississippi for whistling at a white woman, and his trial was an all-white jury who took an hour, including lunch, to decide that the guys who pretty much had admitted that they did it got off. Well, that's because it was an all-white jury in Money, Mississippi back in the day. We forget that, our voice is that voice on the jury, as well as in the ballot box, as well as, your elected officials that work on them. If you vote in a nice guy, stay on him. He doesn't get carte blanche to do whatever he wants to do. He or she, you have to stay on them. Go to the city council meetings. Read what they're voting on. If you don't like it, call them. Send an email, text them. Stand outside their house. Well, now you might not want to be a stalker, but something similar. And we have to be more a part of the process. Listen to what's being said. I think we got all these states now have all these new bills that are coming up for voter suppression. Are we really paying attention to what each state? It was 48 states. Do you know what the bills are in your state legislature? Have you called your legislature to find out if they're going to vote for or against it? We've got to be part of the process. So wherever you can stick your head in, stick your mind in, stick your voice in, that's what we have to do. That's my opinion.
Yeah, what a powerful answer. I've got a really interesting question that's come in from Joanna. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this one. She says that she likes your story about Dennis, but is also wondering if it's sort of a burden then on Black people to have to provide that sort of personally tailored experience so that, you can sort of show that humanity. And to people who aren't like them. Sorry, I'm trying to condense it a little bit because it's a long question. And she asks, really, this is sort of the crux of it. What needs to change for white people to take on more of the initial responsibility themselves?
I just hope that their heart changes, and conversations with them, more conversations from other white people who get it, to have conversations with the people that they know. Not that a white person couldn't learn something from something that I said, but like Dennis, he went back and talked to his wife and his kids. He could make an impact on them that I couldn't make an impact on, that somebody on TV might not make an impact on. But the people in your circle, you can make an impact on them because they are in your circle. They know you. If they trust you and they think you're smart and they think you're wise and they like what you say, or they just want to sit and listen to why you think what you think, that's, what we need to do. And, if we as Black people have to, share our stories with them, or, I had a number of white people call me after George Floyd was killed. How you doing? Are you okay? I didn't know these things happen. Oh my God, educate me. What is, and so I had a lot of long conversations And I had some Black people say, do we have to tell them? Do we have to talk to them? Yes, you do. Okay. Who else gonna do it if we don't do it? If they come to you and ask you, answer nicely, give them as much knowledge as you would like for them to have in a peaceful, loving, non-violent way, like John Lewis would do. Yes, we have to do that, because nobody, we're at a unique opportunity. If we don't do it now, we might not get another time to do it. And that's just what we have to do.
Well, that's a very generous perspective. I've got, I know I'm just throwing them at you, but so many good questions coming in. I've got one from Hope. I also see Bruce with his hand raised. Bruce, just go ahead and put your question in the chat and we'll get to it in just a moment. Hope asks, she says, Minnesota has high levels of segregation and wealth and school achievement gaps. These are, of course, problems here in Birmingham also. She asks, what are your thoughts regarding the costs of segregation? Certainly a pertinent question to both cities.
Yeah, that's true. That one's hard because we get a comfort level living in our pleasant neighborhoods, and we don't know anybody that is not in the pleasant neighborhood. We've got to figure out a way to meet some people from other neighborhoods or go volunteer, go help. I lived on Highland Avenue, which is a pretty swanky part of Birmingham. Rented a condo there for some friends that had a condo they bought for their retirement. And when I got laid off in August due to COVID, I had to move back in with my mom. Now, my mama don't live in the hood, but it's all Black, and there's some spots that aren't the best in this neighborhood. So, it's, at first I was like, I want to be home with my mama, but I'm not necessarily, sure that I want to be here. But then I had to have a come to Jesus with myself. I mean, these are human beings just like anybody else. These are your neighbors. These are your friends. But mostly these are human beings. So let's get out of your house and meet people and talk to people up and down the street. I'm going to try to see if the city can block off this whole street and we have a block party and take pictures of everybody's house and make them wear a name badge with their picture on it in their house so we can get to know each other and have that family neighbor bonded that I grew up with, all the people that passed away. Somebody died, one lady walked around the neighborhood with a card you signed and you put $1 in it. And when she got through, she went back and gave it to that person. So you knew who was dying, you knew who was sick, you knew who needed help. So, and then we'll just have to go to neighborhoods we're not comfortable with, where we don't really know anybody, and see how you can give. Is there I don't know what that looks like, I'm not an expert, but is there a elementary school in that neighborhood? Do they need some people to come and tutor kids in the afternoon? Are there some kids struggling with reading and math? Are you the person who sets up the volunteer tutorial session? I don't know, but it's got to be something, that you could do to help out.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a really powerful question that's come in from Ben. This is a really important one to ask. He says, as Jews, we've also experienced systemic racism and mass murder, but our suffering is very different. He asks, how would you respond to a Jewish person who says, I understand your pain because I've also been the victim of racism?
I think the Jewish people can speak for us just better than anybody else because you guys have been through it, You've really, really been through it. And with the Holocaust, and it's just horrible. I remember learning that as a kid thinking, oh my God, how did somebody let that happen? And I was like, oh, wow. But you can share your story in conjunction with our story because it's all, American story, and it's all about loss and pain and suffering. It's a universal story that you can share. Yeah. And then what a lot of people don't know, that there were a lot of white kids that came to the South. I was watching a documentary the other day about Freedom Summer, and Andy Goodman and Schwerner with James Chaney, who were murdered, and many other Jewish people came down. So Jewish people have had an affinity and a connection with our people for many, many, many decades. And, we need to remember that and let people know that.
Yeah, thank you for that. I actually have a question that sort of relates to that a little bit, because you just mentioned sort of learning about the Holocaust, and of course, you've told us about this important historic event, the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing today, and I heard earlier Rabbi Kravitz talk about how his congregation's been learning about the history of redlining in their city, and of course, this whole program is part of this project that we're doing, where we're sort of exploring the intersection of Jewish Birmingham and civil rights. So I guess my question is, how important do you think sort of doing these historical deep dives are to having forward-facing conversations?
Oh, I think they're terribly important. I think that's one of the things, that is missing, because so much of the history, our civil rights history, our Black history, is not shared in the history books. So white people, Jewish people don't know it like Black people don't know it. We know some of it because we were it, and we've shared that, verbal storytelling in our communities and in our churches. But we've got to do the deep dive and learn. I've had so many friends ask me things, like I've had people ask me about what was a HBCU. They didn't know historically Black college and university. I had one girl, she's 50 something, and she didn't know that there were Black colleges and didn't know why they were Black colleges. And I had to educate her on that system. And I'm not faulting her, but she wasn't taught. There's so much that we have not been taught. And I didn't get that, because you kind of in your own bubble sometimes, even me, and I like to think I can see way outside of my periphery. If I don't see it in the history books, then the white people didn't see it in the history books either. And you just don't know. So about 5 years ago, whenever the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's death was, one of my white friends from church took me to Memphis. We went to Memphis for that anniversary weekend. There was a evangelical church conference called MLK 50. And I went because I wanted to go to Memphis. She was going to pay for the hotel. She was going to drive. And I got to go to the church conference. I always happy to be in church. And I want, it was all be free. So, hey, I go. And then I enjoyed hanging with her too. And then we were going to go to the Civil Rights Museum there. And we were going to go to, what's the other thing? Graceland. And I knew nobody else Black was going to go to Graceland with me. So I had to go with her. That's the only way I was getting it. Anyway, so went and had a great time. When we got to the museum, she was like, this friend was in her 60s, early 60s. And we got to the museum, and she was just fascinated that the Civil Rights Museum, everything. She was taking pictures with her phone and writing notes and stuff. And we got to the Emmett Till exhibit. Now, if some of y'all may not know Emmett Till, I'm not going to hold that against you. Just go home and learn about it. Google it when I get through listening to me. But she didn't know who Emmett Till was. And that first thought immediately in my head was, what? You don't know Emmett Till? But I didn't say that out loud, because that would not have been nice or polite or Southern. I said, okay, let me tell you about who Emmett Till was. And I went on to tell the story. But this was a 60-year-old woman who lived all her life and didn't know Emmett Till's story. And I took another friend to another civil rights museum, and the first picture we saw was Freddie Douglass. Never heard of him. So we've got to do the homework. There's a lot of homework and a lot of reading, and watching Eyes on the Prize and PBS documentaries and reading books from Black authors back in the day and currently that we've all got to do. We've got homework. It's a lot of it. But we would be better from having that knowledge in your head. So when you see crazy stuff come up again, you're like, oh yeah, that's what they did in 63. Well, we're not going to do that again, because that was wrong. I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, it's such a powerful answer. Well, I know we could keep going with Q&A, but I do want to give everyone some time to speak with one another. I have done my best to arrange these breakout rooms so that they're relatively even and all have different members from the different congregations. So I hope that will be successful, we have some prompts that we want you all to consider. And I think we'll give you about 15 minutes and then bring you back to share answers in the chat and maybe give Lisa a few minutes to respond to what you all have come up with. And I think that you as a group can really decide which prompt you want to focus on. Also, do not panic. I am going to broadcast these to the breakout room, so you do not need to remember them off the top of your head. The first prompt is, when Lisa and I were speaking about the program today, we realized that oftentimes the people who come to these programs are people who are already aware of these issues. So the question is, how do we have conversations with people who are not already interested in this work? And then the second questions are, what are the barriers that you see to reconciliation in your community, and what are some concrete things that you could do and will do to take and inspire action in your own context? So in other words, what will you do going forward? Welcome back. I think we have, I'm just gonna ask everyone to go back on mute, and I think we have everyone back. So we are gonna close out in just a few minutes here. I know this always feels like a shorter amount of time than it actually is, but Lisa and I would love to hear some of what you all have been talking about. So, we're actually in kind of a smaller group now. If people want to either put their answers in the chat, or if folks want to raise their hands and flag me down, we could just unmute and do some sharing that way too. Is there anyone who would be willing to share what their group talked about? Maybe also, you can also just unmute if you want, because it's actually kind of hard to scroll through. This is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go to gallery view, because I think I can actually see you all on one screen now. Yeah, anybody who, and Mitchell, I think, is unmuting. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the key question, at least in my mind, is I think all of us attending this conference all are sympathetic to Lisa. I think we all want to take action. I think we all want to do something. We all want to see progress. The question is, how do we do it? And there was a lot of good comments made about at least someone living in the Omaha system, which is very segregated, Latinos to the south, African Americans to the north, and Caucasians in the west section. And I sat there listening, and I think the key is having just what we're doing here, having personal conversation, personal stories, personal interactions with different people that really make the difference. I remember, not that this is germane to this topic, but I remember talking to Leo Weiss, who was a Holocaust survivor, who's now passed on. And Leo, for many years, did not talk about his experience, but then started traveling around the country talking about his experiences, mostly to non-Jewish people. And he said that the response was overwhelming, that these high school students would come over and want to hug him because they could relate. And I felt that way when Lisa was talking. Lisa, you're a very charming lady. You're very easy to empathize with. And to me, at least, maybe this is just me personally, but I think it's the personal interaction of Jews, whites, Christians, African Americans, whoever, Latinos, coming together and talking. And then you get the feeling we're all kind of all in the same boat. That's the key thing. And I think that's one of the things I got from your talk, Lisa, about.
That's it. I mean, we really are. We all, I think COVID has shown that. We've suffered loss. We've had sickness. We've had family members we couldn't go visit. We've been trapped and can't go, travel, and everybody's had the same experience. It's really made us feel more alike than different, I totally agree with you. Conversation, just to keep the conversations going.
Yeah, such an interesting point that COVID too is something that really shows how interconnected we all are, I think. Yeah. Thank you for sharing, Mitchell. Anyone? Sharon, I see Sharon waving. Yeah.
So we have several interesting comments in mind. One was going to work at another organization or place where there will be people who are not like you. So you have the opportunity to have those conversations. getting to a point where you spend more time asking questions and listening. Being careful how you do that, because apparently if you are saying something that is perceived as attacking someone's beliefs, that in the brain, it is the same thing as a bear attacking you.
Wow.
Was fascinating. And then Hope Melton, who is in our group, has been doing a lot of work on affordable housing and making the point that if you're working together on something like that, it gives you the opportunity, but you still need to remember to ask those questions and listen carefully to the answers. I don't know, that's a little bit of a roundup. What did I miss from the rest of the people in my group there?
Such a great list of sort of tangible items. Is there anyone else from Sharon's group that wants to expand? Totally fine if you feel like she covered it all, but I see Eddie unmuting.
I think she covered it all. She did a good job there. Oh, well, we did talk about trying to expand housing opportunities so that we aren't all living in segregated neighborhoods.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's something Hope's working on in her community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we've got time for probably one more comment. If anyone has anything else they'd like to share. I see Norm and Beth down there.
Yeah, I'll just say, I mean, our group, I think we got a little off from the questions. One thing, it was very interesting hearing different people. And then we talked about bubbles, how we end up being in bubbles and how do you leave your bubble? Just that's somewhat a challenge. And we talked a little bit about that.
Yeah.
I think I'm blessed that God has made my life be just a series of bubble busting experiences. Well, I started out at a Black school in public school here in the neighborhood. And then my parents in the second grade put me in predominantly white Episcopalian school downtown. So I instantly had to course correct, and then graduated from there in 8th grade and then went to Alabama School of Fine Arts for 1 year. And then then went back to public school, which was a social and total adjustment. So I've had all these opportunities. So then when I went to Alabama, I was like, well, I'm just going to talk to whoever I want to talk to. And so I just went and, I go in a room and sit down. I don't sit with all the Black people. I sit with some white people sometimes. I sit with the Black people sometimes. I had somebody say about the end of my freshman year, you just will talk to anybody, And so, but it's been a wonderful opportunity to be with people who you might not normally be with, do some things you might not normally do, go some places you might not normally go. I took ballroom dancing and I couldn't find a date, so I just went by myself. It was weird, but it was fun and I had a good time. And my dad was just a catalyst for that. He put us in a lot of stuff growing up. On the summers, we did a stained glass making class at one summer. That was it. So just stretch yourself, do stuff, go places you wouldn't normally go, visit a church, maybe Black church, you get to hear some good music, go some places that you wouldn't normally go. And I think if your intention is to stretch yourself, the opportunities to integrate and to know more will open up for you.
Hey, Lisa, you know what? Minnesota could use a lot more of you. You should come anytime you want to.
Well, now y'all flew me up there before 4 years ago. I'm definitely willing to go. Have luggage, we'll travel. I'm good. Any day.
Any time of the year.
What'd you say?
Any time of the year.
Any time of the year. I came, you all had just had a snow. Thank God the snow I missed the big snow. And it was on the side of the roads when I got there. It's like, whew, because we don't know the snow down here. I don't know snow. But it was great.
That's awesome. Well, I will say we would love to, you know, in a post-COVID world, have anybody on this call come visit us anytime here in Birmingham also, and hope that we'll continue to be in conversation. So, Lisa, anything else you want to say before we wrap up? Any other final words?
I think I shared just don't lose hope, keep hope alive, and I know that's cliche, but it really is important to keep hope. You know, life can be hard, but if you lose your hope, you don't have anything. And do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's it.